All right. Hello and welcome back to the Gumtree of Liberty Live podcast. I'm your host, LibertyDownUnder, and with me today I've got Vitklim back, and we're going to try and break down the latest in the Australian COVID news. I think we might start with the earliest news from this week, which is the Victorian vaccine mandate, which I know that you're
Yeah,
going to talk about. So basically what's happened is that the Victorian government under Dan Andrews has said that there's going to be a vaccine mandate for all Victorians to get the jab before October 15th if they want to be able to work. So it's October 15th for the first jab, and I don't know the date for the second jab. Did you know that one at all?
they need to be fully vaccinated by 26th of November. I'm reading from their website right now.
Of November, was it?
Yep.
Yes, they've got, what was that, 6 weeks between jabs. Or
Yeah,
they've lost their jobs.
which is stupid enough by itself, but just the fact that this is being discussed is retarded. and like reading out right now, all workers in Melbourne and regional Victoria, so that just basically everyone.
That is everyone basically.
Yeah, on the authorized workers list again, fucking dystopian. But what else is new?
So basically, a few weeks ago, he said that if you don't have the jab, you're going to be locked out of the Victorian economy, and he wasn't joking. If you don't have the jab, you're going to be you can't work, you can't get an income because the welfare for COVID is only for the people who are unemployed because of COVID, and if you don't have the jab, you're not eligible for that. So basically,
that was another thing. I don't think I don't remember if that was discussed for Australia, but there definitely was some discussion of if you're fired from your job or whatever because you didn't get the vaccine, you're not going to get like unemployment benefits and everything else that would that you'd normally get. So just as usual, compliance at any cost.
that's basically the point of it. Yeah.
God damn.
Someone said, "Can you?" Someone said in the comments, "Can you rob a bank without the jab?" I think so. I think you could. The question is, can you get away with it? I mean, it would be harder for them to track you because you wouldn't be obviously using the QR code to scan in wherever you go. So it'd be harder for them to track you.
I'm not using it anyway, and
no.
For the most part, which is like one good thing about being in South Australia, no one really gives a shit. Like the only time I get mentions of you're not if you're not wearing a mask in some small store where people do actually notice. Other than that, no one fucking cares, which is nice. Oh god.
I know where I am in Toowoomba, Queensland. There's been very, very low compliance rates with the QR codes to check in. So much so that the newspapers had to complain about low compliance with it. So it's got to the point where the news is reporting on people, not caring. I think, which is very, very fortunate for where I am.
Yeah,
but of course that's going to change sometime soon with the COVID camp being built here. That's going to change at some point.
And by the way, the new World Order hashtag is still trending. I just checked. Great to see, actually. At least in Australia, people are actually paying attention for once to this stuff. Man. And like trying to, what even would be a good argument at this point? Because like, that's always the question of what to do next and how to try to argue against it. Because what else can you do? Because the usual discussion of, well, this violates human rights, this violates a bunch of other, the Nuremberg Code and such. I mean, those are all good arguments, but no one seems to be actually addressing them. They just don't give a shit at this point.
Well, I think the argument that if it was really a pandemic, then people wouldn't be fired from their job is a good argument, because I know where I am,
that's actually a pretty
hospital, good one. The Toowoomba-based hospital, which is the only public hospital in Toowoomba, is at maximum capacity for patients or near that. But they've fired all of their unvaxxed staff. I think they had till last Thursday to hand in their vaccine proof. And if they didn't hand it in, they lost their job. So they're still firing staff all across Australia from hospitals.
Yeah,
they're all understaffed.
Yeah, do you know how many people they fired? Just curious.
Sorry, how many staff they had?
How many people they fired?
I don't know how many they fired, but I think nationwide it's about 10% of all healthcare workers are going to lose their jobs. And unlike New York and America, we don't have the National Guard to fill those ranks.
Yeah,
so we are going to be understaffed massively.
That's another thing which was also baffling. Like, well, for multiple reasons. Like first of all, the National Guard, like when we need to suppress riots and such, nah, we don't need them. When we need to replace people we just fired ourselves, then yeah, and especially for essentially quasi-military force on medical positions, like any argument of dictatorship or just any sort of militaristic structure immediately falls apart. That we're not living in that.
Yeah, that is basically the gist of it. I know even with the National Guard in New York, most of the medically trained National Guard members are already healthcare workers. So really, it's just shuffling healthcare workers around from hospital to hospital. So even then, they can't really plug the gaps over there because most of the trained staff are already involved somewhere in the healthcare system. But as I said, we don't even have anything like that over here. So we've lost 10% of all healthcare workers nationwide. Again in Toowoomba with being at capacity in the public hospital, the Toowoomba-based hospital, it being full with patients, and then of course you've then lost 10% of your staff, even as they're building the vaccination, the quarantine camp, 20 minutes away at a well camp with the airport there. Like if there's an outbreak, we don't have the infrastructure medically to handle it. I know we've got two private hospitals. One's got emergency, one doesn't. But they obviously they're not going to go there because they're more expensive. So that's where we are right now. If there is an outbreak, we're screwed basically.
Yeah, this stream's probably going to be all over the place. But have you seen the new governor thing where the vaccine comes from God and just basically fully going full cold? My God!
Yes. If I'm correct, that was earlier this week where she went.
It was 28th, I think. But still, it's beyond parody. Like, you don't even need to tell people it's a cult now. You can just show them this video.
Yes, proving that it really is like a cult almost.
God, like I don't know if people aren't figuring out for themselves that this is just it's a point of faith at this point to just obey whatever the government tells you. I don't know, like how much evidence do you need?
Apparently a lot, because it's not working for most of Australians. Most Australians are still supporting this. There was the statement by Deputy Tyrant for Queensland, Stephen Miles, Deputy Premier, and he basically said that most Queenslanders would rather have limited freedoms and closed international borders than having open international borders and all their freedoms back, and then have to deal with an influx of COVID Delta variant.
Well, a lot of people are going to basically not give a shit until the government just steps on them directly. Like that's always the situation, unfortunately, because like I have this discussion quite often with people who just refuse to engage with politics, and my point is always, yes, you might be the person who wants to be left alone and just not be touched by politics, but other people will not let that happen. Like there will always be people who will not leave you alone. Therefore, you might just as well try to do something about it. Still, no one's guess.
Well, I guess we can transition from that in talking about support for the reopening of international borders, which Scott Morrison said we'll have the open international borders by November, which is better than his original statement, which was 2024 when we have them fully reopened. So it is sooner than we were expecting. But unfortunately, a lot of the states don't want to do that because they're saying that they've got support in their states for having that remain closed.
Well, of course, WA. But that's not even the main point here. It's that once the borders open, like what do you think is going to happen? The cases are immediately going to spike, and they're going to use it to justify even more lockdowns or any other measures. It's going to be inevitable in this case.
It'll be like opening it up. Then we'll have more COVID influx, and then they'll say, you know what, the anti-vaxxers were wrong. we need to lock down even harder. Because you've got Queensland and WA, Western Australia. Basically, they both said, screw you, Scott Morrison. We're going to do it. And we're not going to open up at 80% vaccinated, which is what he wants. I know Queensland said we're not going to do it till it's quite safe to do so.
Yeah, here's the fun part though. How much of a backlash do you think there will be after they do all this stuff? Because a lot of people are excited for the borders to open, and if the government tries to take it away again, that might be more of a flashpoint than before, because now it'll be even more clear that they don't keep their promises, in any situation.
Yeah, you've got both sides of the aisle saying. So obviously you've got Western Australia and Queensland, which are Labor, but then you've also got Tasmania, which is Liberal, and they said 90% is they're doing it at 90%, not 80% like everyone else. So they're an island and they're doing things differently to mainland Australia. But that gives you 3 of 6 states. You've got ACT, which will probably open up when New South Wales does. Victoria will be similar. South Australia, Northern Territory, probably same, but you've got both territories and 3 states reopening when Scott Morrison wants them to, but you've got 3 states that have said no, they're not going to reopen when you want them to. They're going to reopen whenever they think it's necessary to. So we are still seeing that dissent between the federal and state governments. Of course, you've got Palaszczuk, Premier of Queensland, who said that she was quite upset and frustrated that Scott Morrison didn't give her a heads up or consult her about the international borders, which is hilarious because last month, whenever it was, she didn't consult the Toowoomba Council, the Toowoomba State MPs, or the Toowoomba Federal MP about the quarantine campaign. She didn't consult them. In fact, the council and the mayor found out with the rest of Australia in the news about the Wellcamp airport area being used for the quarantine camp, and that's under their jurisdiction. So there is still that hypocrisy from politicians who want to be treated one way but won't treat other people the same way.
They don't give a shit about hypocrisy, and
yes,
and the biggest thing is I'm just curious. Have you looked much into the what's called the NRX new reactionaries on YouTube and such?
No.
Okay, because I'm seeing a lot of this discussion on basically politics in general, and the approach to it is, since hypocrisy doesn't matter, is it more important to win than to stick by principles? And from my point of view, it's even if the enemy isn't sticking by your principles, well, you wouldn't expect them to because they're your principles, but you should stick by them anyway. Yeah.
I don't really expect politicians to follow principles at this point. I've lost all faith in them.
It's kind of a rare occurrence. It's more like a one in 100, maybe at most.
Yes.
Which sometimes do that.
Yeah, it's very rare to find a politician who's principled. You've got a few, Ron Paul, obviously in America, then in Australia, probably David Leyonhjelm, and then the two Lib Dem MPs in Victoria. But even then, I think they compromised. I heard from someone that they were compromising over the vaccine mandate. No, what was it? The borders. I think they compromised over the borders and agreed to a certain timeline for reopening.
Well, to be honest, the border issue is probably the least impactful of compared to contact tracing, compared to vaccine mandates, compared to mask mandates and such. It's probably the least important one. I mean, maybe it's just me, but not being able to travel just isn't as big of a deal as being forced to inject yourself with an untested drug and other stuff. So.
Yeah, but ultimately, they're all issues of government overreach, whether it be consent, whether it be consent or border control. That consent would be your masks and vaccine mandates, or border control, which is obviously your hard borders. It's a matter
of degrees.
Yes, it's a matter of degrees at this point, and it depends on which state you're in as well. So obviously, in say WA, where they've got the really, really hard border, and again, with Queensland, we had our hard border with New South Wales that we closed for 14 days. Northern Territory had a hard border as well at some point. So they've had harder borders than Victoria has had, and WA is going to keep theirs when they reopen internationally. They're still going to keep their hard border there in place to some extent.
Speaking of some other relevant news, have you seen the YouTube rules update on vaccines and such?
Yes, they're getting cracked down on misinformation there as well, from what I've heard.
They basically outright stated that if you even question whether vaccines work or not, I mean for COVID specifically, then you banned. Like if before there was some ambiguity, if before you could get away with some things, now they're just screw you entirely.
Yes. I'm checking like almost every day, making sure that we're still fine with this channel. If we do get down, I'll have to try and live stream somewhere else.
I mean, at 100 subs, you're probably fine. At 1,000, they probably will do something.
Yeah, I know our podcast I was on recently, Missouri Liberty Alliance. I think a couple of their viewers are in the chat right now. I was on that platform, and they said that they've lost their YouTube for a while because they got taken down because of their stance on like saying the COVID, saying the word vaccine. They got flagged for it and got a strike. So at some point that happened to us probably as well. Get a strike for that.
Yeah,
we have a question in the chat from Superpug Cat, and they say, how can people support the Victorian people and New South Wales people if they don't live in those states? I feel so powerless right now to help Melburnians.
Well, they agree with their politics. That's basically it. It's adherence to the narrative. It's people who I honestly don't know why. I don't understand why they do it either, but they just support government action against those who they hate. And who they seem to hate is people who try to think for themselves and act for themselves. Like, I'm not the right person to ask because I'm not one of those people. I don't understand why, for any reason, they support such extreme government overreach. Like, for any reason. Like, I don't know what to say. I'm too principled to understand those people. I don't know why they do that, but why do they support? Well, because they agree with the narrative. It's basically the key point here.
Well, people support this because, again, as I keep saying to people, we take our freedoms for granted over here. We haven't had to fight for our freedoms. We haven't had them at risk of foreign taking them away. We haven't had a civil war or anything like that. So we don't have to. We take them for granted. We got our independence by voting, basically. So people, have fun with the government taking it away for supposedly a short period of time. But I think probably the best way to help the Victorian and New South Wales people would be through, right now, it seems to be through protesting and making demands that way. Obviously politicians, aren't going to listen to you. But if we get a big enough movement, then we'll start being able to achieve change. That way, I feel it has to be, at this point, it has to be cultural. We have to have that cultural change. We can't rely on politics because most politicians, aren't going to listen to us.
Yeah,
the odd one here and there. Again, you've got the two state MPs in Victoria for Lib Dems. You've got Craig Kelly, federally. You've got a few people here and there who would listen to you, but the government won't. So you have to rely on cultural change. We have to, get people together all across the nation, get them demanding action. And
it's going to be an uphill battle.
Happen, we have to take things into our own hands. Even if we have like mass protests when we have elections next year and people just don't vote in the elections. Like we'll have to do something at this point. To me, that will really make people take notice of the movement.
Okay, I'm sorry, but the not voting point isn't going to help simply because, like, if you don't vote at all, they're just going to disregard you entirely. So I mean, you're just losing out on options in total. But in terms of what can be done, again, protest is the best answer. Like, it's disappointing that the Melbourne protests died out so quickly because they were actually getting stuff done. They were straining the state's resources. Should have kept going. And if similar things happen in other states, the protests should continue. Well, start and continue in other states as well. But aside from that, like, I might have I've seen some news about people leaving Melbourne in significant numbers. Is that true or not? Do you know?
Yes, that is. People are fleeing
Okay.
before the 15th.
Yeah, so that's also a bit of an upside. At least there are people who are going to leave and at least try to cripple the state in that way. But yeah, I mean, on the upside, so far this is relegated mostly to Victoria. On the downside, it's not going to be in the future. Therefore, the more action we take where things happen, the more action people in Victoria keep taking, the better.
Yeah, I think we need more than protests, because we've seen plenty of protests, and they
Well,
are, angry. A lot of the moderate.
We need enough protests, and we need them to be sustained. But what do you mean by more than protests?
Well, we need grassroots campaigns to change people's minds. Protests alone aren't going to change public's minds. If we have grassroots campaigns out there helping win hearts and minds over, protests alone won't do anything, especially because protests are only happening in the major cities, so you're not going to be able to change people's minds out in regional Australia. You have to do more grassroots style campaigns to get.
Okay, but such as what would a campaign look like? What would such a campaign look like?
Well, I don't know that much, but I do know that we need to have something that, like, grassroots is going to be more effective in regional Australia than protests, well, because people there can't make it to protests, or they're not big enough to have protests. So we need to, change people's minds that way, whether it be through the media, getting the truth out there, whether you're doing, I don't know, podcasts and radio shows and writing articles that are, more pro-liberty and revealing the truth and the hardships of the lockdowns, or whether you bring it where they don't understand, you talk about, okay, if we, if the lockdown stay this hard, you're going to, it'll affect your cattle and beef prices, it'll affect your dairy prices, to help them and put it in terms they'll understand, mention the economy and how it'll affect regional lives.
That's not a bad point, but I'm not sure how much reach we have in, especially the regional parts. Like, the big media is never going to cover even the protests. Like, they try to black out on them completely. So there's no chance of them giving like any coverage that goes against the narrative. And in terms of, I mean, what we can do, honestly, it seems like not much. I mean, we can keep trying to persuade people. We can keep trying to do other things, but you really would need people on the ground trying to organize some sort of information campaign. Essentially, that's probably the easiest way of doing that. Yeah.
Someone in the chat has suggested that what we should do is troll pro-vax Aussies on Twitter as well.
Haven't we been doing that already?
Yes,
I mean, that's half of our strategy. Come on.
Yeah, I know people like Jack and yourself have been trolling, say, Piago, which is probably the biggest one out there right now.
Yeah, Jack's doing good work.
I think Piago was getting like 100+ followers a day at some point. I think that was last week. From the pro-vax movement, I think.
Yeah, last I've seen Piago was calling for Dan Andrews to annex New South Wales. Which,
of course, he was. I'm not surprised. I'm going to give to what their latest tweets are. Apparently, Piago actually, there is a rumor that apparently Piago works for Dan Andrews. Like, it's a deputy somewhere high up in New South Wales. In Victorian politics.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. Him being a truly paid shill. That's not surprising at all. That's just a logical consequence.
This is not surprising. Apparently, he's having a go at Spears. Apparently, he's saying Spears is, for those who don't know, David Spears is the host of Insiders, which is an ABC news program. Apparently, PR guy is saying that Spears is, is basically Howard at this point. So David Spears, probably working for the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which is state-funded news, and it tends to be more pro-left than pro-right, because the left wants to give it more funding than the right does. People keep saying the left will say, like, oh, they're conservative, but at the exact same time, the left will say, people will go where the money is. Well, for the ABC, money comes from the left, so they're going to support the left, the Greens and Labor, because they'll give them more funding.
So anyone who isn't an outright socialist is right wing. It's literally like, basically what's the saying? Everyone to the right of Mao is far right for them.
Yeah, well, it really is. Like, if you criticize dear leader Dan Andrews at this point, you are considered to be conservative, or worse. Obviously,
Like
being hard right.
I honestly don't understand what's the fucking deal with this one guy. Why is everyone so like? Why is the whole left so enthralled with him? He's nothing exceptional, like by any standard. The only thing he's doing is just being the figurehead for the narrative, basically. Like, you really couldn't have found anyone better, anyone more impressive.
I wish they had, but obviously, Piago is going to say what most people don't say. He's willing to, criticize liberals and Murdoch and everyone else like that. Really, I guessing say what people on the left want to hear.
Because
and
no one else does that.
He's Pied Piper. He's playing the right tune, and the children are all listening and love it. It really is. People are lapping at what he says all the time. He's getting like massive engagement in all of his tweets. Obviously, follow account is now at 34.4K. When we started this show, when we started the podcasting, it was around 30K. So he's jumping in size all the time. Piago, of course, has been around only a year and a half, and he's almost at 35K followers.
Goddamn mind boiling. Oh, and yeah, as I'm remembering from some discussions, is this whole thing really reveals that people have no idea what fascism is. They just think it's a general bad thing. They have no idea on what the actual definition is and what it looks like.
It's become like saying Nazi and fascist and communist has been so overused by the left and the right.
Well, no,
they're both at fault here. That it really has lost all meaning at this point.
Not exactly.
Been used that much.
So, socialists and communists, they do still have the they have the derogatory far left wing politics. Mean fascism and Nazism, yeah, they've become basically dead terms at this point because everyone's using them. Like, at least, and yeah, fascism is just government. That's basically the best way to summarize it. Fascism is government unbridled without any limits. But because fascism but because people think it's the same thing as Nazism, they are like, well, but we're not racist. How can we be fascists? Easily. Very easy.
We break that down on an episode 2. We looked at Nazis and fascists and where they should sit. And they're not far right by any. They're not far right at all because if you look at
they're socialists. They're socialists who have some conservative, some conservatives' points of view. That's it.
Yeah, they're to the right of socialists, but not by much.
Yeah, if you want to place them on the political compass, the one everyone uses and the one I honestly don't like because it doesn't encompass things very well, they'd be top center. That's their position.
Left of center at the very top. They because they divide by race, not by class. So where a socialist will divide, upper class, lower class, working class, etc.
The modern socialists do a cross section of everything. It's like the worst possible traits of every kind of socialism.
Someone in the chat's pointed out that there are seemingly thousands of Australian accounts that are pro-vax on Twitter, and that's because most Australians are pro-vax in general. So of course you're going to see that bleeding into Twitter as well. People in Australia do tend to be pro-vaccine mandate. I know there's one person in one of my law courses that I'm doing that said that they celebrated getting a major assessment piece done by getting the COVID jab. Then they got sick from the COVID jab, but they don't regret it. So I've listened to people who complain about the COVID jab and side effects of it, but at the same time will say, but we need to get everyone jabbed. There's bad side effects, but everyone needs to get the jab. Again, like we should already be opening up at this point. We should have never had this in the first place, because we are gonna have to live with it at some point, because like as I said before, like we still have the Black Death. That's still around, although it's not as bad because we're more used to it. Like we still have all these diseases that have been around
Oh yeah,
hundreds of years.
this is
You
this is
can't get
another thing.
you can't get rid of those.
Yeah, this is another thing that I brought up to some people, and they didn't have a good enough answer. Like there have been studies done previously. Like coronavirus isn't unique. Like there are other viruses like it, so we know what the general trend is going to be. And for instance, there have been studies done in 2015 which uncovered that if, like now, a vaccine doesn't stop you from getting infected, if it still allows for the virus to spread, then it just speeds up its mutation. Like, but because that science was done 5 years ago, now no one cares, and it doesn't suit the narrative, therefore it must be wrong.
We're seeing that many variants come out this year after the vaccine came out.
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the variants are from 2021, not 2020, because of the vaccine. The virus the virus interacts with the vaccine, and then if it survives the vaccine, it'll then mutate and work out how to get it, or it'll mutate afterwards, or it'll come up against the vaccine and mutate to get around it that way. Well, it is going to mutate.
Yeah, firstly it'll mutate, and then like since the vaccine doesn't actually stop you from spreading it or getting it, it's still going to remain. Like the virus isn't going to disappear. Like a lot of people who are talking about polio and such, like that's a stupid comparison, because that vaccine actually allowed for the virus to be. It actually provided you immunity. It actually did almost practically eradicate the virus through those means. And another thing is, which has been the most eye-opening for me, was the virus data and Project Veritas videos, because and the FDA hearing. Like these three things are probably the greatest piece of evidence that you need against the vaccine. Like 2 streams ago, I mentioned the FDA video in which they were discussing booster shots, and there were 2 particular clips in that video. One at 4 hours 9 minutes, and one at 4 hours 21 minutes. And what they essentially boiled down to was that the number of adverse reactions spiked by like an order of like 100 times or 1,000 times in 2021, and the only thing you can attribute that to is the COVID-19 vaccines. And then you have the rates of adverse effects, rates of deaths, and when you basically pass through the statistics, it ends up being that 2 people die for every 1 person saved, essentially.
Yeah.
But yeah, like since this has become such an ideological issue, it's really hard to change people's minds with actual facts. Because even if you are right, they're just not going to listen, because for most people, admitting that they're wrong on one thing, or that narrative is wrong on one thing, means taking a critical look at everything else, and they just don't want to do that. They don't want to put in the effort, which, as with most things, is the reason for stupid decisions.
Yeah, it's become so divisive. It's no longer about medicine and science. It's about politics, and you can only speak on it if you're a scientist or doctor that is vetted by the government and is approved to speak on the issue. They make sure that you parrot the narrative. Like if you dissent, you'll be thrown out. Like I've been speaking to teachers and doctors who have lost their jobs.
Yeah, that's another
because they spoke against COVID.
Yeah, with the doctors especially. Like you'd think that'd be the people who would know. Like all the nurses getting fired right now who've been on front lines during COVID. Like I would trust their expertise more than that of any politician, because they've actually been there. They've seen like what the virus has been like, and the fact that their opinions are being disregarded in terms of get the vaccine or get the fuck out. It just tells you that it's a point of obedience more than anything else.
Someone in the chat just pointed out that there is also the guy Remi Rasheed. He's the guy that's opening his businesses. He's got 20, 30 restaurants in Sydney that is reopening, or in New South Wales that is reopening in December when the vaccine passport runs out. Yeah, he's losing millions. He's losing millions of dollars to reopen his restaurants to the unvaxxed in December of this year. And I think people like him, like if we get businesses doing the exact same thing, like that's how you win people's hearts and minds. If you go back to talking about,
Yeah,
it's going to be more than protest. If we have businesses that are opening up and don't care, that's how you really
that's
start doing it.
that's
You start
that,
using the economy.
yeah, that's another good avenue of attack. And the only thing is, you need a lot of people to, you know, you need a lot of people to exhaust the resources to basically make it so enforcement will be impossible. You'd need a lot more than just, one guy, or one guy with a couple of restaurants. You'd need, I'd say, like at least 10 of them.
Well, before the tradie protests in Melbourne got too violent, I think it was Monday. This is Monday I'm talking about. Monday they said, we're going to close down the construction industry for 2 weeks, because we've had the protests. And
Yeah,
there was outrage. There was outrage about that from more moderates. The left obviously supported it. The right didn't, but more moderates um, were outraged by that, but also outraged by the violence. So the way I see it is, if we can get businesses, if their business are willing to risk it, and risk getting shut down, if they can reopen, um, then that's the way you do it. You start, using the economy, and you start saying, like, if you're hurting businesses, they're opening up, they have to open up to get an income, and then they're being shut down. You're hurting family businesses, and you're hurting family businesses and small businesses.
yeah.
They're being forced to reopen to get an income, and then they're being shut down. You're hurting families. Reopen Australia. That's how you do it. You point out the real hardships Australians are getting through.
Well, the
That's also
fact,
how you make it. That's also how you make an impact in rural Australia. If they're seeing the economy suffering in the cities, then they'll understand, because that most of them are farmers or agricultural in some way. You what you do is you protest in a certain way that I understand. Like massive urban marches are not going to be as effective on them as businesses opening up because they're being forced to make an income, and then being shut down by the government or being fined by the government. That's you do it in a way that people out west or east, if you're in Western Australia, so people in regional Australia are going to understand. You go off the economy.
well, the fact that Tomies are finally getting pissed off is a good sign, because these are the apathetic people who normally don't give a shit about politics. Like it's also the situation where that when the government does go too far, then at least they notice and begin to ally with people who are trying to resist the government. I mean, so yeah, I mean, let's just hope it continues. And as to the question in the chat, in a year's time, I mean, some people will still definitely keep wearing masks in a year time, but I doubt that that the majority will persist for that long. Like,
It depends as whether we still have lockdowns in a year's time. If we still have lockdowns, so let's say that the same government, let's say that politics don't change federally, and we still have Scott Morrison's government, but we still have lockdowns by state governments next year, then we're going to see masks being worn. It depends on how the election goes, and because the election will be a good indicator of people's mindsets. So if we still have the similar voting proportions as we did last time, 2019, that'll really showcase the situation with regards to masking. So it will depends. Like we can't, answer definitively on that, because it depends on the mindset that we see in the next election. And
yeah,
as an anarchist, I don't like relying on elections to change people to, I don't think we can vote our way to freedom, but I do think that we can use elections as a good, indicator of the national mindset. If we see people flocking to the minor parties like the Lib Dems, One Nation, Clive Palmer's UAP, if we see those parties getting high votes, even if they don't get MPs, but if we see them getting like good voter turnouts, if we can see them getting like 10-20% nationally, that's how you really show that there's being that movement for change.
I mean,
If you
you
see
can at
people
least
voting for
try.
minor parties.
I mean, elections are just another tool in the toolbox, essentially. At this point, like you can abstain, but what's the point? You're just losing out on options. And as for how mask wearing might come to an end, I don't expect it to be like mass non-compliance. I expect it to be a slow winding down of people who are actually prepared to go along with it. Like from what I've seen, the enforcement of mask wearing is lax at best, but that might be just South Australia, so don't quote me on that. But
it is a lot stricter in Melbourne and Sydney.
Yeah, essentially, I expect some people to just eventually stop caring about it after like another half a year or so, and then people who are like exceptionally believers in mass or who are under the most serious risk, by their opinion, they probably will keep wearing masks. Everyone else might slowly just stop, and some businesses might try to keep enforcing it, but I doubt it's going to I doubt people are going to listen in the long run. It's so yeah. Just short answer is it's probably not going to be mass non-compliance. It's going to be a slow bleed of people who comply.
Yeah, the way I see it going is, you're not going to have mass non-compliance all at once. It will be, the movement will slowly pick up steam as time moves forward, and you'll start to see more and more people in business, stop complying with the government as they reach their personal point of no return. Like once they see a certain amount of tyranny, they're going to that'll be the end for them, and they'll have to flip and oppose it. So it will be, until we reach that boiling point, there'll be a slow progression.
Well, that's the thing. I'd say for resisting like government action, mass non-compliance is probably like the needed response to that. But in terms of trying to put an end to those measures already in place, such as mask wearing, it's probably going to be slow and over time instead of mass action.
Yeah, agreed. Because again, we are going to see, as tyranny increases, you're going to see more and more people get sick of it and join the ranks of those who don't comply. But you're not going to see instant change, I don't think.
Mm. Also, have you seen the like? I love that some of the people who have been doing compilations of police brutality from the Melbourne protests, they've been like putting tagline of "It's for your health" on it. Like that's such a good, because if you think about it, that would have to be their argument, that it's for your health that we're just beating you to shit. That's such a good contrast.
Yeah, if we can, like, online, if we can point out the arguments of the pro lockdown movement and point out how wrong they are, highlight police brutality, it's probably a good way to do that. But even like if we anger the left enough, I'd say that say left and the right as well, the pro lockdown right, which is smaller but still there. If we anger the pro lockdown movement enough, like say online, and if we can provoke an angry response from them, it also will show like you can also try and win a few people over that way. If you can anger the left and the pro lockdown right enough, you could probably reveal like if you can reveal their true emotions as well. Although that's going to be less successful, but it's at least something you can do online. With regards to changing people's hearts and minds, but it is going to rely on mass non-compliance. Once you reach that tipping point nationally of mass non-compliance, then you're going to see a real change. The question is, where is the tipping point? Like, how much more tyranny do we going to have to see before people realize that this is bad for Australia? At what point are we going to reach that?
I'd say we're gonna see quite a bunch, but at least people globally are paying attention to what's happening in Australia, and it is at this point, like, for the political commentary sphere, like, people know that Australia is just like it's worse than Canada at this point. Like, I'm not sure how we compare to New Zealand. I still think New Zealand might be a bit worse, but the fact that we're more of a joke than Canada is just, it tells you that people notice how bad things are getting, and which is why, like,
and no.
How come?
Well, because in Canada they also re-elected Trudeau. In Western Australia, they re-elected McGowan. In Queensland, they re-elected Palaszczuk. So we are seeing, we can say that we can keep saying that people are angry, and we're seeing different with of tyranny, but the fact still remains that we are still seeing that tyranny. People are voting in the same government. So the masses don't care. They're still voting the exact same politicians. They're still voting for all they complain about tyranny. They're still voting the exact same people into power.
Yeah, well, the change is going to be slow in any case, and damn it, I forgot what else I want to bring up. Doesn't matter. I think we have some more questions in the chat from Super Cat.
Yes, so we have another question. Is there any link between house prices and general economic health and anti-tyranny movement? Because I think an upset middle class can really blow shit up. And I think that you can make an argument there, but the way that I see it is, even with we do have rising house prices, but that to most people is actually seen as a good thing because it means that where they are and the house is worth more. So people are becoming they're happy with the house being worth more to an extent.
It's a less obvious. Basically, house prices going up and general economic situation slowly deteriorating is a less obvious sign of. Basically, you can't easily implicate the government in it. There are other things you can attribute this to. There are other things you can try to blame it on. But yes, the fact that the middle class is slowly dying out due to this, among many other factors, it does mean that there will be more people who are willing to sacrifice whatever they have to go up against tyranny. But then again, a lot of people aren't economically literate enough to see the through line of how house prices going up is a direct fault of the government. Like you can find it, but most people aren't going to go through the effort to do so.
They'll blame the market. People that don't understand how supply and demand works and how basic economics work, because they all believe it's it's capitalism's fault. It's the fault of the capitalist class, the class. It's their fault. If they blame anyone, if they want to blame anyone, they'll blame businesses. They won't blame the people. They won't blame the government. They'll blame businesses and capitalism. That's who they'll blame if they see it going south. They'll blame free markets.
Yeah, government and outside intervention. Like
if anything, they'll ask for more, if anything, they'll ask for more government control and more government regulation of the businesses. They'll go the opposite way. They'll want more government, not less government.
Well, that's what the affordable housing scheme is. Like it's the government trying to fix an issue caused by the government and other factors. Yeah.
Basically, yeah. Well, and we know how bad rent fixing is, because it really means that there's suddenly if you have lower rent rates, they're going to all be bought up by people who they're going to be, because you have more affordable housing, but the amount of houses you have don't change. And often what we see, say, for example, in America, what we saw is the rich people would be buying up more and more apartments that they could then rent out. They'll be buying up more apartments and then for themselves. So they'll be, all buying the biggest apartments they can find. And it does mean there's less to go around for the smaller families and the poorer classes. I think that was a point made by Thomas Sowell in his book Basic Economics. He made a good point about supply and demand with regards to rent fixing.
Yeah, well, and supply and demand applies for all things, especially, which some people seem to forget, is for labor as well. Like one of the reasons why immigration is such a key issue is because that screws with the supply of labor and therefore with wages. And then again, you have the issue of whether women being in the workplace is a good thing or not is up to your decision. But it definitely did essentially double the supply of labor, and all the economic consequences of that can be seen now, where prices for everything have gone up like severely over the past decades. Like there are of course many factors for all of these things, but if you want to look at the supply and demand dynamics, like those are the first things that jump out.
I think we are getting close to the 1 hour mark. Are there any other tweets you want to go through before we wrap this up?
I mean,
Any of the
I don't really
bad
have
tweets
any.
we've seen from this week?
I don't
I've
really
got a
have
few. I
any.
think
I
I've got a
have.
few. I think.
Yeah, I'm looking at the hashtags right now, and like some of them are nice, some of them are just people memeing. Like Australia has fallen, half of it is just Australia has fallen in love with this cute animal or whatever. Yeah. Trolls.
That is the left wing sabotage.
Yeah.
The
Oh yeah,
the
there was one thing.
hashtags.
There was one thing I want to mention earlier. The fact that people are now calling out Australia, such as DeSantis in the US and Poland, like that's a really good sign in my opinion, because it's drawing even more attention to the station, and it's countries who are countries and people who are otherwise respected globally.
So yeah, you've got DeSantis and you've got Ron Paul in America, probably two big ones. But also let's look at I guess that's a good point. We'll talk about Poland, because that's only recent. You had a
Yep.
bunch of Polish MPs in Poland protesting outside the Australian embassy in Warsaw, basically saying that Australia is being tyrannical and they need to stop what they're doing. I think that's good. We're seeing other countries, politicians, taking our side in this. We are slowly seeing the international change. But getting the story out there like we are, and like a lot of people are, getting the story out there for the international audience to see, we are creating that movement around the world of anger towards the Australian government, which I think is good to see. Like it could have some bad consequences. So I know there are arguments being made internationally for tariffs, for Australians, for Australian businesses. You put in a tariff on exporting and importing goods, but that of course that'll affect that'll hurt the people, not the government. So that'll hurt the economy. That won't hurt the government.
Yeah, I mean, how can you even aim at the government like in this station, and who's going to do it? Because I mean, Poland, they're good guys, but I'm not sure they have much of an influence over Australia at all.
No, the economic power in the EU lies in the west and the center, not the east. The east is still decades behind because of the Cold War.
The EU is just a German project. Like fuck them. Is basically
the
EU
point. At this point, it is basically the French and the Germans.
It's not even the French. It's the French, the French elite essentially, because you had the Yellow Vest protests going for how long? Like you can see that people don't support it, and French exit from the Union would basically ruin it forever. So you can at this point just accurately call it the Fourth German Empire and just be done with it. The Fourth Reich. So anyway, I thought you had some tweets. Let's keep going.
Yes, I have a really a cringy one from.
Oh yeah, put it on screen. Let's do it.
So this is by Chanel Vella. She's a reporter for 7 News Melbourne, and this is a tweet that she did. That I think it was yesterday. Even she did it. Let me pull it up.
Please do.
There we go. Questions about the vaccine, infertility, or pregnancy? Don't Google them. Don't ask your neighbor. Ask people who went to school for a really long time.
Oh, I've seen that one.
And have professor as their title. And that was in relation to a tweet about a pregnancy Q&A with regard to COVID vaccines.
Yeah, I'm sorry. If pregnancy and immunization specialist, I'm sorry, is that not the exact person you're talking about? Like the only difference is no professor in the title. Is that really the only point? God.
Listen to people, not because of how good they are, but because they have the word professor in their name. Of course, that's the exact same argument we've had. So Dr. Kerry Chant,
literally just obey authority.
She's the chief health officer of New South Wales. She has not been a doctor. She has not been a medical practitioner. She's been a bureaucrat, a civil servant her entire life. The only reason that she has the word doctor in her name as a title is because she has the degree.
But you can be sure she knows a lot about the New World Order.
She has not been out there in the field, She has not been working in medicine. She's been working in government the whole time. She's called doctor because she has the medical degree. Just because someone has a degree does not mean you should listen to them. Like, this is basically the argument that Chanel's making here is basically, don't do your own research. Listen to the experts. But the question is, the point is that
it's once again the anti-critical thinking. Like, I should really find that New York Times article, which was directly advocating against critical thinking, and just plaster that everywhere, because that's what they think.
Well, yeah, because you need to try and get more sources. Like, you need to talk to people on the left or from the pro and anti-lockdown movement to get a more accurate picture. Because they're both sides are going to push an agenda. So you've got to talk to people who are from, because there are experts who are anti-lockdown. So talk to those doctors and scientists, as well as talking to the people who are pro-lockdown. You've got to get a more balanced perspective than just from one side.
Which is why I mentioned the Wes reports and the doctors who were speaking out against the vaccines, because that's essentially the other side of the argument, which never gets heard. And yeah, it's obvious from this alone that, don't Google them, don't ask your neighbor. Well, you're literally arguing for people to go to the one particular approved source of truth, essentially.
Well, for example, in America under Trump, in 2020, the left was saying, don't trust these scientists that are working with Trump.
I remember
because
that.
it's a Trump vaccine. Don't trust them. But as soon as Biden got in power, trust the businesses that are making the vaccines. Trust the scientists. It's not the fact that they're qualified. It's the fact that it's your party.
There are a ton of examples of that. Like when the lab leak story was actually approved, when it suddenly became mainstream, it changed in a matter of a day. Like, all the people who have previously decrying it as a conspiracy theory now immediately were like, well, this might actually be credible. Like, this is why the hypocrisy is so blatant. Like, you don't need to go far for examples. You just have the immediate heel turn, and no one cares, because everyone at this point is, partisan completely. It's either, and even like, you basically have like three general groups of people. You have the left partisans, you have the right partisans, and you have the quote unquote enlightened centrists, who are basically just like, well, we have nothing and we'll do nothing, so whatever.
Yeah,
they're irrelevant, unfortunately. Like, so many people who are trying to be like, well, both sides have good points. Well, sorry, but first of all, they don't, and second of all, you're irrelevant, because you're not going to be changing anything.
See, I do think that, like, the way I see it, it's not like no side has all the answers. I think that's the point made by Gandhi. No side is perfect. It's basically yin and yang. Both sides, even the worst side out there.
Yes,
right,
but the main pitfall of that is that, what good ideas can you pluck out from the left today? You can maybe, if you want to be
pro-gun.
Yes.
Marx was pro unlimited gun rights.
I'm sorry, but I think you can pick better people for that.
No, but that's my point. Like, even the worst people out there will have one or two things they're good on. Even the best people out there will have one or two things that they're bad on. Like, no one is going to make the perfect argument.
Well,
so
unfortunately,
you do have to be.
Unfortunately, for the most part, like, yeah, you can pick out this one good thing, but everything else should be discarded because it's awful.
Yes. But that's why I say look at both sides of the story. Don't just go straight to the left or to the right. Look at media from both sides.
I know, but because I'm just really mad at people who say, well, both sides make good points, and then they just concede half of the important stuff to the left and pretend like they're still against them. Like, yeah, I shouldn't get into it now because it's not relevant and we're running out of time. So, yeah.
Yes, we have hit the 1 hour mark now. Is there anything you want to do? Any closing thoughts before I finish this one off? Any closing thoughts from you?
Well, aside from recommending people to have a look at that, let me actually try to find it. It's the FDA hearing. This is
that is linked in the first live stream that you did. I can put the one in the description again, and I can put that link in the timestamp in that description again. So when this one goes out.
Yeah, there's a second timestamp I found since it was 4 minutes. It was 4 hours and 9 minutes. Like that.
If you can send it to me on Twitter, I'll put that in the description for you.
Oh yes, I will. I've just found it.
Cool. Other than that, we have another live stream in about 20 minutes with myself, Jerry, returning guest, Heritage Libertarian, and Christblood Libertarian, talk about libertarianism and Christianity with regards to how we should approach the state and its mandates during COVID. So that's probably what I'm looking forward to. That was meant to be last weekend. It's now this weekend. So hopefully it's going to go ahead. So that'll be in about 20 minutes time. So I've got to go set that one up. But anyway, thanks to everyone for coming in and watching this live stream. It was a bit undermanned. It's just me and Vitklim.
Yeah, we host more people.
Jack couldn't make it, but apart from that, see you guys soon.
Yeah, cheers everyone.